Hello, I'm Emma. Yes, I can be heard, can't I?
Hello, I'm Debbie, and I think you can hear me.
And I'm Susan.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed for our last panel, and this panel is perhaps the more practical rather than the more sort of, I suppose the other was practical too, but this is more practical in a political sense. If we are to persuade the Church of England to change what it has been doing and to bring its money back to the front line, I'm afraid that involves a certain amount of getting off our backsides and making sure that there are people of similar minds to us elected across the Church of England. And for that to happen, us being a grassroots movement, it needs to start at the grassroots. So we're going to have conversations now taking us from how to form a local Save the Parish branch, out of which we would hope that people might stand for Deanery Synod and what that involves and what that means, who are then the electors for General Synod, who might in turn be able to pass measures that will be good and stop measures that will be bad. But to get to that, we really need to be at the most local, and I'd like to invite Susan, who has set up Save the Parish Cornwall, to give us some of the fruits of her experience. Save the Parish Cornwall is probably our most vibrant local group, and it has really set the pace down in Truro in trying to stop the absolutely disastrous Minster model ministries that are being created down there, where some of you might know one of the plans is for an entire deanery to have 2 priests, one of whom doesn't work on Sundays. 29 churches. You can imagine how well that has gone down. But anyway, I don't want to steal any of Susan's thunder, but what we'd love to hear is her experience and her advice on how to do it.
Well, thank you very much for asking me. I hope the microphone is working now. It was very interesting, and I very much enjoyed meeting people at lunch and hearing other people's experiences, because quite clearly there's not one-size-fits-all answer to this. Everyone will have a different experience in setting up local branches and different aims and objectives, very probably. But I thought I would talk about how we did this in Cornwall and why we did. And as Marcus mentioned, it was the On the Way restructuring plan. Now, this gave us a tremendous impetus to do something. And for those who don't know about this plan, On the Way, it was something that was championed by the former Bishop of Truro, Philip Mount Stephen, and the Bishop of St John's, Hugh Nelson. And there will be elements of it that will be familiar to those of you who are facing schemes for pastoral reorganisation and the potential of vicars overseeing large groups of parishes. This was the idea behind On the Way. So it started early in 2021 when deaneries were asked to come up with plans for the future, and not just the immediate future, but the long-term future, the next 10 years. And the reason given at the time was money. Deaneries were told that the stimulus for this was lack of cash. In fact, over time, the diocese has backtracked and admitted that this was not, in fact, the case. It was not really about money. It was about the fizzy new schemes Marcus referred to earlier, the schemes to bring in new worshippers. Of course, we all agree new worshippers are needed, but the way they were approaching it was very suspect. It was very ambitious, and it was clear from the start these plans were potentially very damaging. Now, why? Because they asked deanery synods to create the plans. There was no initial central meeting in Cornwall to ask people what they wanted. No meeting in Truro bringing people together saying, what do you want? Instead, plans were rolled out in silos across deaneries, one by one, and deaneries were asked to create plans for the future, a hugely big ask. Now, traditionally, I have to say, being on the deanery synod is not everyone's favourite job. And the reps were taken by surprise. Many people in deanery synods were taken by surprise by this big question. And it was in those difficult years after COVID It was lockdown, meetings were held on Zoom. And it swiftly became clear, and I was on my church PCC at the time, that something was afoot. The Bishop of St. Germans repeatedly said, oh, the process was bottom-up, not top-down, but entirely the opposite seemed to be the case. Consultation, and I remember people in my own church bringing in pieces of paper with what they wanted for their church written on it, thinking they would be listened to. Of course they weren't listened to. Consultation was absolutely minimal and token, both with congregations and with the community. And it certainly wasn't bottom-up, it was top-down. Because, I hate to say it, the Bishop of St. Germans, in more than one deanery, he sent a letter saying if his preferred plan was not adopted, he would go through with it anyway. And the preferred option, certainly in the big deaneries, which in Cornwall are Kerrier, Penwith, East Wivelshire and the north of the county, was always for plans for pastoral reorganisation. Huge benefices overseen by an oversight minister with external funding coming in for lay workers, education workers, youth workers, etc. That was the preferred model, and we could all see, we were all starting to see something was very wrong. And the more we heard, the more we thought we had to do something. Unfortunately, we did become aware there were others who thought like us. Through Save the Parish nationally, we got names of other people in Cornwall who were keen to do something. And so with the names from Save the Parish, we formed a core group, and we met for the first time in March 2022. And we've continued to meet as a core group. So if you're thinking of setting up a branch, I really, really would suggest a core group of people, fairly small. We've got 12 deaneries in Cornwall, and so there's one person from each deanery. And that's just about big enough to have a sort of management committee in a way. And one thing came through as we started our meetings was that when we heard from others in other parts of Cornwall, people who thought this was all wrong, when they'd spoken to the diocese, to the powers that be, they'd all told, like as we had been, for heaven's sake, you're the only people making a fuss. Sounds familiar, yes. So we all agreed we needed to bring people together and connect them and give them a voice. Well, how to do this? Well, initially, it is hard work. It's simply a question of going around to churches and finding people. We had Save the Parish flyers, and we took them round. Now, to take Kerrier, Marcus mentioned Kerrier. Kerrier has become very well known for its extraordinary, and there's no other word, ludicrous, plan to create a giant benefice of 23 churches with one rural dean and a pioneer minister who doesn't work on Sundays because she's bringing in new people. Now, Kerry is very close to my heart because I grew up on a farm in West Cornwall, and actually on the edge of my church was in Kerrier. And Kerrier, for those who don't know it, is basically the Lizard Peninsula, from Helston out to the Lizard Peninsula, but it's also churches to the west of Helston. So it's pretty long distance, and the roads are terrible. I went to school in Helston, and I've written down here friends after school, because there's no question of going to see friends after school out in Mullion or Monacan or Coverax. Much, much too far. Yet, this Kerrier deanery plan proposed one huge place with a vicar covering these huge distances, congregations who are expected to travel from church to church down very, pretty poor roads. It was ridiculous. So, we all agreed something had to be done. What did we do? Well, I suppose what I did personally, I decided to go around to the churches, which I knew quite well actually, on Friday afternoons or Saturday mornings, so there are always people there doing the flowers. And very often people who are very willing to chat. And through this, in Kerrier, we heard about what had happened. Through the ladies who were doing the flowers, that these plans had been pushed through on Zoom. They hardly knew how to use Zoom. They didn't understand really what was happening. And worst of all, this plan had been passed by one vote. So the nature of church life in Kerrier would be changed forever, potentially, by one vote, by a group of people who didn't really understand what was being voted for. So, right now I will get to what we actually did on the basis of finding all this information. We started to build up a mailing list. Thank goodness for emails. Makes it also easy. We had a mailing list, and others in the core group did this in other parts of Cornwall, and we created quite a big mailing list. And a clear picture emerged, people were outraged and helpless, and they were not being heard. And again, the constant refrain, don't cause a fuss, you're the only people. You're the only people, you're just a vocal minority. It's really not a problem. So we decided then to take action. We wrote a press release about the situation ahead of the Diocesan Synod in May 2022. It was published in the Western Morning News. Simultaneously, we wrote to the Bishop of Truro asking for a meeting, expressing our concerns, a long letter detailing our concerns. Now, I often wonder what would have happened if the Bishop had said, well, hey, we've all got different opinions, why don't you come round and why don't we all have a chat? Well, in fact, I'm afraid we didn't see much humility and power as our speaker earlier spoke of. In fact, there was no humility and power. The opposite happened. We had a very angry letter from the then Bishop of Truro saying, really, I don't think I need to meet you. You went to the press before you spoke to me, and I just don't think you deserve a meeting. Which was not I mean, if you wanted to stop a campaign, that's not really the way to respond, because you just carry on campaigning, and that's what we've done. We've continued to seek meetings with the bishops, and we continue to do so with our new bishop. We have a new bishop of Truro now. And the message consistently is that we need priests in parishes. That is what people want. It's what people on our mailing list want. And that is what works. And in places where the oversight ministry model has already been trialled, it's just failing. We have something called Transforming Mission in Cornwall, which was an early version of this, which has spectacularly failed in 5 towns in Cornwall. So we did have plenty of material to campaign. How did we do it? Well, the core group would set out key dates and key messages to get across at those dates, and diocesan synods are very good pegs for campaigning. We constantly built our mailing lists, and we encouraged people on the mailing lists just to do something. If they were worried, they needed to do something. So that meant going on to PCCs, going on to deanery synods, and the diocesan synod, and also encouraging people to attend meetings and the deanery synods. And Neil, my colleague, he's here. We weren't allowed to speak at our deanery synod, did we, Neil? But we were allowed, the rural dean in the end, because we weren't reps, but the rural dean gave us 3 minutes on his mobile phone to say something. You know, he timed us, it's ridiculous. But you can make a difference, you can get your voice heard. We also set up a blog, which has been very useful. And I think the address is on your website, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And so in dealing with that, that is useful because if you are mailing your supporters, you can always refer to articles on the blog. So, for example, one of our big stories was more pen pushers than priests in the Diocese of Truro. There were more people working in central house, church house, than priests. So we could email our supporters and say, look, all the details are here on the blog. That was very useful. We also set up social media. I would be wary about, because if you start Twitter or Instagram or whatever, you've got to keep it up, and that takes quite a lot of time and resources. So we do have a Twitter account, but we haven't ventured further into social media. We also produce publications, fact sheets, because of course people like to read things on the internet, but they also like pieces of paper in their hands. So we've done fact sheets on 10 reasons to resist pastoral reorganisation, 10 ways to resist community interest companies, because they're pushing, the diocese really wants deaneries to become community interest companies to push forward these plans. And one of our most successful publications, Don't Turn Out the Lights, Bishops, which really turned the course of the debate. This collates people from across Cornwall's views on what was happening. And I wouldn't underestimate the power of the local press. I think we sort of think local papers don't matter anymore. Local papers really matter, and particularly letters to the editor. And that really has helped. That's got people's voice heard. Don't forget to contact STP nationally for help, because they are just wondrous in helping with information and support. And we did hold meetings fairly regularly. I say one county-wide meeting a year, but then in the deaneries people would meet more regularly than that. And 2 final things. A key source of information we found in setting up our local group were the papers produced for Diocesan Synod. In there is our details of the budget. And in the budget, you will find no end of information and potential stories to campaign on. That's where we found the information about more staff at Church House than priests and parishes. And finally, this is just, I'm not quite sure wasn't quite sure where to put this in, but there will be people who won't want to sort of go public as Save the Parish supporters. And there is someone on our core group who has never really, the diocese, he's very active in his deanery, but the diocese doesn't know he's a Save the Parish supporter. And that's enabled him to be quite effective. So I just would respect that if people want to remain silent.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Susan, and thank you, Save the Parish Cornwall, for all the work that you've been doing. And I think they've done one interesting thing to note, I thought, about when, as you said, you discovered in the accounts that there were more full-time equivalent employees in Diocesan House than there were stipendiary clergy in Truro. And you tweeted that, you put that out in the press release, and the Diocesan press team denied it, and it had to be pointed out to them it came from their own account. Which suggests that whilst Save the Parish Cornwall might read the diocesan accounts, their comms team maybe don't. Now, it's very exciting to... yes. Let's see if we can should we put that over there? See if we can keep these as far away from each other as possible. It seems to be less. Whilst getting involved in a pressure group can be fun and interesting, nobody has ever suggested joining deanery synods. And yet, it is one of the most important things that you can do. Not only because it's at deanery synods that a lot of these decisions are taken, but also because members of deanery synod are the electors for general synod. And Debbie McIsaac is here to talk about deanery synod elections and what to do if you have the good fortune of being elected. Debbie, I'd like to hand over to you.
I think Prudence and I are actually the mothers of the house of General Synod, House of Lady. I think we are Prudence. We have very long lineage as members of General Synod, and General Synod's gone through a whole bunch of adjustments. Would that be the way to say it? Let me go back a little bit of time. But first I want to address, I think I'm doing this for the third time of asking. The most important thing you can do is to ensure that every possible deanery synod representative is appointed. Have the full numbers. That's what matters. They're the ones who are the electorate. That's so. Every one of you in this room should, if there's a space in your deanery, put in for being a deanery synod representative. Now, some of you will say, I've done with church meetings of any kind. I do not want to do that stuff anymore. And you probably should, you probably should tell me off for doing this. But I'm going to tell you, what I would urge you to do is if you can't bear any more deanery synod meetings, please, could you put in for it anyway? You don't have to come to the meetings. Just give us a vote. Not me, I don't mean that. But just make sure that all the electors' positions are filled. Otherwise, we have only ourselves to blame for not being able to effect some constructive changes within the Church of England. One of the things the other thing I want to ask, because I've got my 5 minutes, and they've been told for a third time of asking, now fourth time of asking about putting in for, to be a representative on a deanery synod, is that, I've lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, I want to tell you something else. some of you may not appreciate, you will for your own, but you won't for another person's diocese. The dioceses are the foundational elements of the Church of England. It's not General Synod. General Synod does whizzy bits with legislation. It's not, and where we debate, those questions that are never actually going to be resolved. The important thing is the diocese. But beware, dioceses have long, long, long reputations. Each place, the diocese in Cornwall is going to be very different from the one in Carlisle. Not only because of distance, but because of the historicity of it. The churches are different personalities, and it is the diocese that is the core of the Church of England. And that's why we've got to attend to those two things. One is to strengthen the local, and to also recognize what is in effect 42 different churches run by under the supervision of the bishop, and they're very different individuals. So I think you have to have a nuanced approach. There is no single remedy for the problems that dioceses have when you get a difficult, awkward bishop, and believe me, I've known my share. It makes things very difficult for the local churches, or it can make those things. But there are also some really, really wonderful diocesan bishops. And they are subject to their own constraints because of the nature of the House of Bishops. So share a thought and quite a lot of prayers for them. They make very difficult decisions. And I just want to bring the reality that it was Leslie Newbegin that said the church is always both local and universal. And I think we need to remember that as we try and turn it from something that has been quite a despairing experience. I think we're on the brink of a great deal of hope and life coming back into the church.
Thank you very much indeed. And I would like to ask Emma, who has recently been elected onto General Synod in a by-election for St Albans Diocese, who has nonetheless slogged away for 4 long years on the Save the Parish Steering Committee and was there at the very first meeting, having already been called a rascally voice by the then Archbishop of Canterbury. I would like to ask Emma to talk a bit about standing for General Synod.
Thank you. I wouldn't describe myself as a reluctant debutante, but a reluctant politician. Going back not many months, I was just a normal member of a rural congregation with no interest in the church's political system at all. I was a lifelong churchgoer, but I was hardly even aware of it. Anyway, in 2021, Marcus wrote me into starting Save the Parish with him, and something happened. I fell through the looking glass, perhaps. And now, suddenly, I find myself on every level of the church's governance. From the bottom, PCC, up through my deanery synod, and they're quite right. I heard deanery synods described as a collection of people waiting to go home. Then the diocesan synod, and again, they're quite right. That is where you can start interfering with what is going on under your nose. The budget has just been debated at my diocesan synod last Saturday, and I and some of the people who care about where the money is going have hunted down the sums and made a big fuss, and we are making progress. So don't despair. If you can join the diocesan synod, that's fantastic. But now I have been elected to the dizzy heights of the General Synod, and I would say that although I might have liked to spend my life growing roses and having a quieter time, it is the retreat of people who think like us from these bodies that has done the damage. If we care about these things, we have to participate. So, since the 26th of September, I've been a lay representative in the General Synod. My predecessor was a man called Ben. In my experience, there are only 2 ways to get out of any voluntary job in the Church of England, and one of those is death. Ben chose the easier route. He moved to Australia. So Ben's move triggered what we would call a by-election, but they don't in the church because they like to have all their own ways of doing things. And on the 26th of September, while I was on holiday in France, I got on a Zoom call and found that I had romped home in the count and against 4 other candidates. I had stood on a very clearly pro-parish and unity ticket, not talking about other issues, just doing what it says on the tin and talking about the parish. And so my fellow steering committee members at STP got frightfully excited and said, this is a tremendous vote of confidence for our campaign and it bodes very well for next summer's elections. They seemed to feel it had really very little to do with my winning personality. Anyway, well, the truth will set you free. So there I was, and I won quite conclusively, which is great, but I had to do various things and put some work in. First of all, I had to find 2 people on deanery synods who would propose and second me, so I got them from different deanery synods because I thought they would then encourage their friends in those deanery synods. I had to write an election address, which was just a piece of paper all about me, myself and I, and the wonders of what I've done in my local church and what I think about the diocesan synod and the national church. So it was quite easily done, but the central group can help you with that. So you can email the Save the Parish website if you want to stand, we'll help. Marcus kindly shared his election address with me, so I had a precedent to work from. And then I had to attend online hustings, and this was getting quite interesting for me because it was my first brush with politics, and I really haven't entered that world at all. And so the Zoom hustings was quite an eye-opener. I had to make 2 speeches, but one was 1 minute and one was 2 minutes, so they weren't exactly taxing. And I had to answer questions. We got written questions on the day, and they weren't that difficult, and then some additional questions on the night. There were only 40 people on this Zoom. And so it wasn't an ordeal at all. I was also given the list of electors by the diocese. Usually they like to keep all that information to themselves, because they don't want people to talk to each other, just like Susan said. But on this occasion, I was allowed the list of deanery synod members for the period of the election only, and I was allowed to email them. So I did do that, and some of them wrote back to me and said, you're the only person who has bothered to email me, so you've got my vote. So it really made a difference. So please start working out the structure in your area, which deaneries there are, which vacancies there are, and start networking with people there. Start with an open mind, do some homework, and soon, like me, you may find that you've been sucked through the looking glass and you're at General Synod. Save the Parish needs your help, and we can help you to get organised. So do consider coming to join our happy band of pilgrims. And so there are 3 things to do for next summer. Fill up your PCCs, fill up your deanery synods, and get networking, tell all your friends, and stand for the General Synod if you can bear to join me there. Never forget you're representing the people at the bottom of the whole heap, which is people like you and me, and that's what we're there to do, to give everybody a voice. And now I feel I've delighted you long enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma, and thank you to the entire panel. A few final thoughts on this. The first is, we've spoken so far about standing for deanery synod if there are slots available. Actually, it's an election of your congregation. And it is worth also just checking whether the people who are representing the congregation do in fact represent your congregation and which way they are in fact going to vote. It is not an awful thing to have an election to work out which side your parish actually is on. Secondly, one of the most wonderful things about Save the Parish has been that we have people who disagree profoundly about all the other issues of the Church of England. And some of our dinners after General Synod have been genuine places of grace, where people who are on the opposite side, particularly of the sexuality question, but also of churchmanship, have sat there, and because they'd already got to know each other before discovering where the other stood on those other issues, were able to have deep and profound and moving conversations with people they already trust. So it doesn't matter where you stand on any other issue, you can vote on those whichever way you want. For the Save the Parish sort of campaign, the only interesting question is, do you want to save the parish? Everything else is for another day. So do consider joining our happy throng. Do consider prodding other people to do so. And when it comes to the general election for General Synod in August, September and October, it'll be September 2026, let's see if we can have a real campaign with some rallies and some geeing everybody up. I might take after Gladstone and his Midlothian campaign and take a train down to various parts of the country and see what we can do. But let's have some fun with this. And now there'll be a short commercial break as we set the stage up for Bishop Esther Pryor for her speech in a moment.
Thanks.